Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. How is everybody this evening? Bob, enjoy the nursing home. When he went to the nursing home, he'd take his keyboard and he'd play a few songs and he'd talk to the patients. And so one day, he went to the nursing home to visit. He went in this room, one of the patients. He set his keyboard down. He played 2 or 3 little songs, and he talked to the patient for a few minutes. And then he decided it was time to leave, and so he looked at the patient and he said, "I hope you get better." And the patient looked at him and he said, "I hope you get better too." Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. You know, if I didn't love Steve, I'd think as an insult. But anyway. Well, of course, thankfully, this congregation has a good sense of humor. And through the years, I have been preaching, and I tell stories. And I think that I don't think the pulpit is a place to be a comedian, but I think a story that makes a point, even if it's humorous, is fine. And sometimes I've told stories that had a humorous ending, and people just sit there. And I would say, "That's all right. At midnight tonight, please do not call me when you wake up in bed." And you get it, and it goes off, and you start laughing. Do not call me. And so, anyway, by faith, Hebrews chapter 11. It's a great faith chapter. Last week, after we left, I think I told the class Sunday morning. I know I told them, my sweet wife. We got in the car, and she said, "You sure do move slow." So. You told me I moved slow going through class. You may speak slower too. You and Jim want to sit together. Just a little louder. Okay, Grandma. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. In verses 17 through 22, the Hebrew writer had been talking about really the patriarchal age. By faith, these individuals did things such as Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. He gets to Moses now, and he spends, of course, a great deal of time on Moses, but he talks about the Mosaical age and time, and by faith, Moses especially, what he did. We've got to think about this chapter in several different ways. We often just isolate this chapter and talk about it's a great faith chapter. And so consequently, being a great faith chapter, let's just look at faith and what faith is and what faith does. And there's nothing absolutely wrong with that. It helps us understand faith. And I think in part, that's why God put it there for us, as Jim in his prayer prayed just a few minutes ago. But at the same point in time, too, I think we have to look at it within the context of the book of Hebrews. We've been talking about this book of Hebrews now. This is only the 12th week. I move slow, but this is only the 13th week, 13th week, can't count. But needless to say, the Hebrew writer's been talking about we have it better. As Christians, New Testament Christians, we have it better. And contrasting the old and the new. And he talked about especially that Jesus is far better than anything with regards to the old law and what the old law had to offer. And we've gone through, he's a better messenger, better apostle, better priest, better covenant, better sacrifice. And he's really in the midst of Christianity is a better way. And the point that the Hebrew writer is trying to make here is that throughout time and throughout, as he's talking to those of Jewish background, throughout our family's time, our folks have always walked by faith. They've always obeyed God by faith. They've always listened to what God had to say. And in listening to what God had to say, they acted then because of their faith. And so what he is encouraging them as he winds this book down is to say, look, we've been telling you all these things, and we've been telling you that it's better. You need to know that it's better, and we need to act by faith. And so he says, with regards to Moses, he says Moses trusted God enough that he made wise choices, because by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were afraid of the king's commands. Aram and Jochebed saw that Moses was good. Now, you have parents and you say, well, wait a minute, I don't remember but the mama being involved and in the story, but yet the Hebrew writer says the parents. Is it possible that Aram or Amram was not credited, if you will, in the old law in the book of Exodus with regards to hiding a child? Could be. It could be that the Hebrew writer is just simply saying that this is something they did, and maybe he doesn't know full well. Of course, I believe he's inspired, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't know full well exactly how it happened. History, as we have it, that is recorded in the book of Exodus, talks about Mama hiding Moses and his sister. And so there is sort of, we don't really know exactly why he uses the plural of parents. And that's really not what we should be keying on anyway. By faith, Moses, when he was born, there was a decree made that what? What was the decree? All the children, all the boy babies were to be killed. And so they hid Moses. Notice what the Hebrew writer says. They saw that he was a beautiful child. Does anybody recall what Stephen said in his defense? That they saw that Moses was what kind of child? In Acts 7. A well-pleasing. That he was a well-pleasing child. Beautiful child, well-pleasing. It's actually the same word, same Greek word. Same thought. They were not afraid. Now there's the key. They were not afraid of the king's command. The king's command was to do what? Kill the kids, kill the children, kill the boys, excuse me. But they decided to do what? Hide him, right? And so they hid him. But they were not afraid. How is it that they were not afraid of the king's decree? Believed God was with them? Sure. Believed something could be done? They didn't fear. They didn't fear the king's commands. And so, by faith, Moses then, verse 24, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer the afflictions with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. Boy, there's a lot there. By faith, Moses, when he was come of age, at what age was he? 40. He was good age, wasn't he? He was a good grown boy. Refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, to what extent and how all that went down, we do not know. There's a historian by the name of Josephus that gives us some insight as far as his history. He says that there was a big ceremony that Pharaoh came down and Pharaoh brought Moses the crown and was trying to make Moses, if you will, the next Pharaoh, the next king. And when he did, Moses took the crown off and threw it in the ground on the floor and stomped on it and then walked out. That's history telling us that. That's not scriptures. We don't know. We just know that he refused. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't be part of Pharaoh's court. He didn't want to be considered a what? What was Pharaoh? Ancestry-wise. Yes, but he was a Arab, Jew, what? He's Egyptian, right? He was Egyptian. Yes, he was royalty. Very, very true. But he was an Egyptian. Moses was what? He was a Jew. A Jew. Don't want this to be misconstrued in any way, but Jewish folks have always been very, very proud people. Proud of their ancestry, proud of their lineage. Biblical times especially, they were always, even, you get to the New Testament times even, and still later on, trace the family all the way back to Abraham. That was something they did. And so they were very proud, and he did not want to be an Egyptian, but it was not just because he was Jew. The Hebrew writer gives us some insight. First of all, I want you to look at verse 25. I want you to notice the first word, choosing. This was a choice he made. It was not something that was forced upon him. It was not something that he was told, all right, this is what you have to do. It was a choice. He made the choice. Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. Choosing. He made the choice. He made the choice to do what? To suffer afflictions with the people of God, than to enjoy the passing or the temporary pleasures of sin. So he had a choice. His choice is the same choice that all of us have, a choice with God or a choice with the world. And he chose rather, now look and think about what he says, to suffer affliction. You got a choice. This is the easy way, and this is the hard way. You get on MapQuest on computer in order to find the direction of where you want to go. And almost anywhere from here, there's two ways to get there. And, one maybe is, let's just say, 10 miles in 20 minutes, and one's 8 miles in 10 minutes. Well, which one are you going to choose? 8 miles in 10 minutes, right? What if it says, well, it's 15 miles, but it's only 10 minutes? Oh, that's better. We usually choose the easy path. Pour water down a hill, and where does it go? It goes down a hill, right? But where does it always go? To the place of least or no resistance, right? We choose the easier way. It's just the way we are. It's the way things in life is. But the Hebrew writer says Moses chose to suffer. Yet Peter reminds us, if any man suffers as a Christian, let him not be what? Ashamed. Let him not be ashamed. The thought that Moses chose affliction reminds us that by faith, we really have to do the same. But we have to do the same with the same viewpoint and vantage that Moses had. Now, think about it. He didn't want to enjoy the temporary pleasures of sin, but he, verse 26, esteeming or considering the reproach of Christ, the reviling because of Christ, greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. He looked to the reward. Now, before I make application, I want to give you what the word looked means. The word look means to look at one object so as to look at nothing else. In other words, have you ever been driving down the road and you've been so focused on one point, you don't see anything else? That's the idea. That he looked, he had a single purpose, focus look. Well, what was he looking at? Well, look at what he says. He says that he was looking to the reward. And so Moses chose affliction, not riches, but affliction, because he believed what? There was something better. The afflictions would get him something better. That was, and the implication here is not, it's not stated, permanent. Why? Because it talks about the temporary flesh, the things that are short-lived, right? So there is implied a contrast of that which is at least longer and better. And so the eternal reward. So Moses chose by faith. He made the right decision. His parents did. They hid him. They saved his life. We know that story. We didn't get into it because the Hebrew writer at this point didn't get into it. But then he says with regards to Moses, Moses made the choice. And his choice was God over the world. Now let's make an application. The Hebrew writer is trying to tell these people, choose God. Don't choose the world. Choose what God tells us to do and not the world. And so, by faith, verse 27, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. He finishes the story of Moses, doesn't he? He finishes the story of Moses in quick detail. And he just simply says, Moses forsook Egypt, kept the Passover, and went out and went on dry ground. By faith, Moses did all this. By faith, Moses acted. By faith, Moses obeyed. By faith, Moses went forth. By faith, Moses saw something better. And so, that's what the Hebrew writer is saying. By faith, here's the things you got to do. Anything else? It is believed so. Yes. Very good question. Believed so. Anything else?
Who would be your best guess as to who was Pharaoh at the time of Exodus?
Who was the Pharaoh? Probably Ramesses. Do y'all remember? How old's Jessica? Suzanne? How old's Jessica? Our Jessica? I know. How old? Yeah. 34. Okay. So about 30, 35. So about 33 years ago, there was an exhibit at not the Peabody, but at the pyramid. No, the Orpheum. It was in Memphis anyway, of Ramses, and that was probably the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus. Why we remember that is because our first niece was born, and she was little, and we took my sister and brother-in-law and Suzanne and I went, and we took Jessica with us, and just, I mean, why? Because I don't know. That's what Carol Vernon said we was going to do. You take your kids with you, yeah, even though she was very small. And there was this huge representation right at the very beginning of the exhibit. And she had to come apart. And Vernon convinced her that that wasn't nothing but a big doll. And that's how we got to see the rest of the exhibit, because we just about didn't get in. But anyway, enough of my family history. But probably Ramesses was, because I've since done some research on that, and that's probably who the Pharaoh was at that time, the Exodus.
I have read so many different things, and partially, don't you think it's on how long they were actually in Egypt as because when you do the genealogy,
Yeah.
it really don't work out 430 years.
Right. Right. There's some overlap there.
Yes.
That, or at least when you begin to study genealogy, it's believed that there's some overlap and some time periods started while some were still going on, and so that's why it doesn't work out. Yeah. Very good. Very true. Anything else? So by faith, verse 30, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. Remember the story, right? One time a day, 6 days, seventh day, 7 times. 6 times they're what? They're quiet, right? 7th time, what? Shouting. They're loud. It's a party. and so, needless to say, the walls fall down. But they did that by faith. By faith, they obeyed, you could say, really. I mean, that's, to me, that's the whole gist of that story, isn't it? They did exactly what God said do. Now, as we found out in the sermon Sunday, everybody didn't. Achan, remember, took stuff he wasn't supposed to. But the story itself is the idea of obedience. And so, by faith, they acted obediently. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. Why did Rahab not perish? Do I? She hid the spies. That's very true. Carry that on forward in the story. Faith in God, good point. Court out the window, yeah. She did what she's told to do. You're all right. Every one of you are correct. But go to Joshua chapter 2, verse 11. What do you find? An agreement. Right? There was an agreement that was made. That, because I hid the spies, because I threw the cord out, let them escape, don't take my life. Make sure my life's spared. And her household too. Yes, Joshua chapter 2. It starts in verse 11. It does not finish there, but it starts in verse 11. And so they're saved. So that's why Rahab. Oh, I'm so sorry. I am very sorry. Oh, that's not the first mistake I've made. Do you remember the passage where in Psalm 139, children are heritage of the Lord, the fruit of the womb is their reward. I quoted that one Sunday night. It wasn't fruit of the womb. It was fruit of the loom. So, needless to say, I might as well offered the invitation right then and just gone home. Anyway, but you have to laugh at it. But Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe. And the reason being because her faith caused her. And something else, if you go back in Joshua chapter 2, you do see her faith. You might say, now, she was a harlot, preacher. I got you. Understand that. But doesn't she talk about in Joshua chapter 2, doesn't she talk about God? And doesn't she talk about his power? She has a faith. It's a misguided faith. She evidently has a faith in God. And so you say what you will about her profession. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I find that one hard to believe, but yes. It makes it a whole lot easier to preach.
I have a lot of innkeepers back in those days.
Yeah. It's very true. Anything else? And what more shall I say? Now, Just think for a minute. That's an interesting statement, just because if this is, as we've said from time to time through this study, if this was a sermon, the Hebrew writer writing the sermon, the speaker just says, well, what else can I say? I've tried to teach you this lesson. What else should I say? But then he goes on to say, for the time would fail me to tell of Gideon. And I'll just bring these up, just kind of give you maybe a one or two word thought with regards to these. But he says, time failed me to tell of Gideon and the 300 men, Barak versus Sisera, you might say, and Samson, of course, his great strength, Jephthah, which is Judges chapter 11, also David and Samuel. We know the stories of David and Samuel. Go back to 1 Samuel and read all of those if you want to. Who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword out of darkness, were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two, which is probably, or at least tradition says that this was probably Isaiah. Were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. Now he goes through, and if you think about all of this, these folks, and I'm carrying you back all the way back now to verse 32. These folks were in the time of the judges and the kings. He just summarizes them. He's given them sort of the early history, if you will, of their lineage and what they did by faith. And he says, but recall these folks, and he carries them through, like say, Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah. These would be in the times of the judges. And then, of course, you have David and Samuel in the times of the kings. What did they do? Well, and then it goes through this list. And we can figure out, who these folks are by what they did because of our studying of the Old Testament, such as Daniel when he, verse 33, stopped the mouths of lions. Verse 34, quenched the violence of fire. Who's that probably? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Others. The verse 35, the beginning there, the woman received their dead raised to life again. Does anybody have a thought? That would be a good one, but we got to go back to the Old Testament. Let's go back to the Old Testament. It was Zarephath. Okay. Elijah. Yeah. Exactly we don't know who he has in mind, but it's just possibilities. But notice what he says. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. The thought is, as he goes through, as the Hebrew writer goes through all these folks, is that they had something in mind. They had a picture. They had a view. And that was heaven. And that's what they were aiming for. That's what they were shooting for. And they believed that they must go through all of these things by faith to gain that promise. And so, in many ways, these folks, verses 32 through 38, are a reaffirmation of what he has just said about their beloved Moses. Right? Moses chose suffering because he had the picture of heaven. These folks went through these things. Well, why? Well, because they wanted to obtain a great inheritance. Look at what he says then in verse 39. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. The promise, the salvation that more than likely the Hebrew writer has here, is that salvation which was ultimately fulfilled in Christ. Remember when we studied Hebrews chapter 9, we talked about how that you had to have the cross that reached back to Abraham and Moses and all of those of the Old Testament. And then it, of course, reaches forward to today. But you had to have, and we do have, that cross. And so the thought is that these folks had not received the promise that was fulfilled ultimately in Christ. And so he finally gets to it, even though the writer of this book did not write in chapters. It's still, if you will, this major point of by faith these folks did stuff because they saw the promise and they understood salvation would be theirs. And so they lived for that. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. And so he says, God provided something better. There's something better than this life. Man is, or let me back up, society is becoming more and more attached to this world and sees nothing beyond and nothing past this world. And yet the Hebrew writer reminds us that there's something better. And so they would receive it. We can receive it. They would receive it. Heaven itself is offered to both those that lived under the old law and those that lived under the new. Now, it took the cross for those folks under the old. But they lived by faith, not having seen it, but believed that it was there. Now, let's make an application. Don't we do the same? Don't we do the same? Don't we live by faith? We believe that Christ lived. We believe that God's principles are true. We believe those things. And there are facts, there are ways, there are, for about lack of a better term, arguments that we can, I believe, prove. We can prove the existence of God. We can prove that the Bible is beyond human capabilities of production. And thus, what is said in those things, in that word, is true. It has been proven. It continues to be proved, and it will be proved in the last day. And so while man, in his basic nature, while he is still, as a society, becoming more and more attached to this world, still has an upward look. The Greek word anthropos, which is translated man, literally means the upward-looking one. And if you go through history, you'll see religions of all sorts that have some sort of either a god or system of gods which they worship, believing that they are the gods that will get them to their place. When I was my senior year at Freed-Hardeman, at the time, my advisor looked at me and he said, I was searching for a class or two to take my last semester. And he said, Brother Paul, it sure would be a shame for you to get out of here not having studied world religions. I was thinking the exact opposite. But needless to say, I took the class. And it's fascinating what religions are in the world and what they believe. The difference between all of them and us is that we have a living, abiding Savior that has, can, and will save us. And heaven can be ours. And so by faith, the Hebrew writer says, you got to hold on to this. Anything else? I want you, we'll stop right there, but I want you to think about the 12th chapter. I want you to go back and I want you to read. It won't take you a couple of minutes. But I want you to give it some thought. After you read it, I want you to give it some thought. And what you're going to see is the idea of patience, perseverance, and pain, all mentioned in this chapter. And as you look at it, I want you to see it for what it really is, and I want you to see it as an inspiring chapter that the Hebrew writer is trying to inspire for us, the reader. And see why he's trying to inspire us, how he's trying to inspire us. And then we will take it, next week, we will take it from the standpoint of the person of the day to whom the book was written, and we will take it and look at it from our standpoint as well, and how it can inspire us. It's fascinating when you look at it, that chapter to that end. It's fascinating. But we began with the 12th chapter, which in some ways, the first couple of verses could fit very well with the 11th chapter if we were dividing it. If we were going to say, well, let's look at everything, because the thought really does flow from the 11th chapter. So anyway, that's a good place to end. Any questions, comments, suggestions, thoughts? Be glad to entertain all of those. Well, all right, we do thank you. We hope that you'll be with us Sunday. Oh, there we go. We're going to look at the sermon Sunday morning is prizing forgiveness. And Sunday night, Lord willing, we're going to talk about how to make the most of your time. And we hope that you'll be here for both. And then we're going to have Suzanne's providing popsicle fellowship at church Sunday night on the front lawn. Y'all have a great week. Thank y'all.